This evening I want to pick up a few points that have been mentioned in the previous talks, and I want to focus on them under the aegis of uncertainty, which I will also call indeterminism. All right? Uncertainty is just the fact that when we make decisions as translators, there are no rules, I suggest, to guide us, and that we get very good at making that kind of decision, which is what I'm interested in. And I'm going to relate it to a new area of research for me, which is the translator's personality. Okay? I don't know very much about it, but I'm looking at all the research that's been done on it over the past few years. Now, we're following through this book, which I'm updating as I speak with you. We had equivalence, we had scopos, we had descriptive translation studies, all of which responded to the problem of equivalence. Equivalence as a concept did not really envisage uncertainty or indeterminism. If two things are equivalent, somehow people were remarkably sure they were equivalent. And as I said, I think I'm very jealous of people who can do that. Personally, I have lots of doubts. Now, the uncertainty paradigm or indeterminate paradigm proposes another solution to equivalence, and that solution is there is not any. Okay? It's a radical response to the equivalence problem. And I'm going to be looking at some of the theories that are there, and I'll be considering them in relation to the way we operate as people. Have I presented this to you already? I can't remember. I'm getting lost. This is a minimalist definition of what a translation decision looks like. Did I give this to you? Here you go. ST is your start text with a problem in it. And so the translator, for a problematic ST, formulates some solutions. So target text 1, target text 2, target text 3, there can be many more. I insist there's more than one solution, because if there's only one solution, then it's a grammar problem or a terminology problem, not a translation problem. And if there's only two solutions, like foreignizing, domesticating, or free, or literal, it's a pretty boring problem. I think that psychologically, cognitively, most people can develop far more possible solutions. And the problem is not developing these possible translations, it's selecting one of them very quickly, because speed is part of what we have to be able to do, and confidently, which means that you feel okay about the ethics of your choice. So in this little split-second process of the translator, I think we've got a lot of quite complex things going on. There's a generation and a selection. And the selection has to be justified. And often, I propose, in the cognitive process of the translator, if it's an important problem, the selection implies a degree of theorization. Translators, when they translate, have ideas about what they're doing. You could call it reflexivity, or thinking about yourself, or putting part of your mind outside yourself, or imagining what's happening downstream because of this decision. All of that, for me, is a process of theorization. And I insist on that because I don't like people who separate theory from practice. Like practicing translators here, academic theorists over here, two separate worlds. That is very unrealistic, very counterproductive, indeed antagonistic. Whole generations of professional translators believe that academic theorists know nothing worthwhile. Okay? Similarly, a generation of academic theorists believe they're the only ones who have true knowledge and that the professionals have got just a lot of opinions. And so we don't like each other, basically. Okay? So part of my model here is to challenge that, to say, look, really, you guys are theorizing all the time. We're doing it a bit more formally, but we're basically doing the same thing. We're discovering knowledge as we go along. Okay? Now, indeterminacy simply suggests there's no rule for deciding between. If there is a rule, then it's solved in other fields. As I said, grammar and terminology. And perhaps the desire of your client, after all. Okay? Still. So it means that a solution, a translation solution, a solution that belongs to this kind of skill that I'm positing here, we can't say, yes, it's right, or no, it's wrong. It'll be, oh, yeah, it's right, but it's a little bit too long. It could have been a bit more natural. Wrong, but it's getting there. It's got some of the qualities we need. Okay? And some people are very upset with this kind of solution. Some people want to be 100% sure of what they're doing. And if you're like that, if you're a perfectionist, perhaps you need another job. Okay? Or you should become a terminologist. Or you should work on the technology, because technology is great. It works or it doesn't work. It's a yes or no thing. Well, sometimes it works slowly, but okay. With translation solution, we have to live with indeterminacy all the time, I think. As I said yesterday, when I talked about status, often we have to pretend that there is no such thing as indeterminacy. We have to go to our client and affirm our status and say, here's your translation, it's brilliant, or here is the translation. The client pays for that, but I know and you know there are many other alternative translations that could have been done. All right, so there we go. That's a minimalist decision of a form of a translation decision. Did I tell you about Gavagai? No, I'll tell you about Gavagai. Okay? Gavagai comes from the philosopher of language, Willard van Orben Quine, who was a professor of philosophy at Harvard University in the late 50s and early 60s. He produced a theory called the indeterminacy of translation. And he bases it on a thought experiment. Here is the thought experiment. A linguist travels out to the end of the darkest archipelago and finds a tribe, and he's going to describe their language. The linguist sees a native. A rabbit runs past. The native points to the rabbit and says, Gavagai. And the linguist writes down, Gavagai equals what? Rabbit, because there's a rabbit. Okay, very simple. That's it. That's equivalence, right? Now, Quine, this is 1958, starts to say, well, how do we know that the two are equal? How do we know what the native just meant? It could mean, look, my dinner. Look, the back legs on that rabbit. Look at the flea on the rabbit's left ear. Or anything. Okay, look at how fast they go. There is no certainty in this proposed equivalent. And so Quine goes on and says, well, the linguist could start asking a series of questions to follow up. Or they make observations and repeated observations. But he concludes that there will never be absolute certainty. Even if the linguist marries into the tribe and spends 40 years living with these people, there may be secret knowledge about Gavagai that is not revealed to outsiders. And Quine proposes that translation in its very nature suffers uncertainty or indeterminism. His paper is more analytical because there are some kinds of propositions that are more determined than others. Not all propositions are equal, but the general proposal is that translation is indeterminate. For the theorists among you, his actual purpose is not translation. He's using this to illustrate the idea that for a given set of data, there are different theories which can account for the data, and there is no way to say one theory is superior to another. So we have a language, we can have many different grammars of the language, and they can all work. And he was dealing with that. That was his real problem. But he used translation as an illustration of it. I like it because I recently came across an Australian version of the story about, you know what a kangaroo is, I hope? Good. Okay. Now, the word kangaroo comes from the north coast of Queensland when Captain Cook in the late 18th century put a flag on Australia that said it belonged to Britain, okay, and on his way home he had a shipwreck on the coast there. The people had to go ashore. They went ashore, they met the natives, so it's the actual story. A kangaroo went past, okay, a big rabbit, kangaroo. They're actually big rats developed. Yeah? You know? Native points to it and says, "Good, kangaroo." Okay, this is the local name. But the kangaroo, we think, we're not sure, actually means large grey kangaroo, as opposed to nargali, widow, or bigal, which are other kinds of kangaroos. So when Captain Cook's crew, somebody there wrote down kangaroo equals kangaroo, big animal, it was wrong. We think, are we sure of what the language was when they spoke it at that time? No, there's lots of uncertainty everywhere, but it's a real case of Quine's thought experiment. So it's not as abstract as you might think. Okay? Now, in the theory, there are two kinds of indeterminacy that you can find. And it's not as radical. There's a non-radical version and a radical version. Okay? I shouldn't say two. There are many kinds, but I can organize them this way. All right? That man there is Andrew Chesterman. He's the man on the right. Okay? Now, Chesterman is aware of this problem of indeterminacy, and he proposed some years ago that we not talk about equivalence, we should talk about similarity. And there is a philosophical tradition, an analytical tradition, looking at similarity from Wittgenstein, from family resemblance. Okay, that a brother and a sister or two sisters share some features, but they're different in other features. And so Chesterman proposes that translations in relation to the ST, we can talk about sharing some features and having some different, and we can describe the degree of similarity. So instead of equivalent yes, equivalent no, we talk about 70%, 90%, a percentage of similarity, and it's a probabilistic mode of thought, like machine translation. Machine translation is based on exactly these probabilities of co-occurrence. What's interesting, in our common use of similarity, we use something like translation. For example, we would say that a daughter is like her mother, right? Daughters, you're probably a bit like your mother. You can see this when you look in the mirror. You're probably becoming more like your mother every day and worrying about it. But would we say, I don't know in Chinese, but in English, it's hard to say that the mother is like a daughter. Similarity tends to go upstream, tends to go towards the past, as it does in translation when we think about it. We don't say that an original text is like the translation. We don't judge it that way. We say the translation is like the original, or not. So there's an asymmetry in the relations of similarity in everyday language, and we think in translation. Actually, it's a good teaching trick that I use every year. I stole it from Andrew Chesterman. He takes a published translation. Let's say you have a poem in English and you have a published translation in Chinese. Okay? Now, you take the translation and give it to the students as an original text. You say, here is the poem that this poet wrote. And you invent a poet. It's good fun. You can invent a whole person. Yeah? And you get them to translate it into English, so they practice their English, and then you show them this English text. And they will all find it inferior to the original, because it's a translation. And then you can tell them at the end of the class, this thing you find inferior is actually the translation. And the thing you thought was the superior original is actually the original, I'm sorry. And this thing that you thought was the translation, you thought was the original. It's a very confusing class. But it brings up these presuppositions of inferiority in translation that are part of our culture, part of our cultural concept in translation. And you can demonstrate it in class very easily. Unless you have some really clever students, in which case the whole project fails. So, similarity accepts indeterminacy, but to a certain degree. Okay? Now, Chesterman had a debate with Rosemary Araujo, who is there. Chesterman is an Englishman who has developed his career in Finland. Araujo is from Brazil, and she is an adept of deconstruction. Her great master is Jacques Derrida, and Araujo argues against Chesterman, saying that indeterminacy is in the source. It's in the text we're translating. The text we're translating has no inherent meaning in it in itself. It is always open to many interpretations, and there are no stable meanings. Chesterman, it's published, the dialogue is published in Target, and there is a series of responses to this debate, and it's really a debate about indeterminacy. Chesterman proposes, he says, Rosemary, yes, I agree, but some meanings are more stable than others. And Rosemary says, no, they're all unstable. Because for a deconstructionist, if you accept degrees of stability, then you need a model of stability to measure the distance from, and she doesn't accept there is any model of stability. That would be equivalence. Okay. It's a similar problem in the evaluation of machine translation. Machine translation output is always evaluated on all the models, there are many, in relation to a reference translation. And the reference translation is taken to be the correct translation, usually done by a human. The problem is that there are many possible translations that humans do. So we are basing our evaluation of machine translation on an unrealistic proposition of similarity. So that's the debate between the extreme model of indeterminacy, which would be deconstruction, Rosemary, and the English pragmatist rationalist model of indeterminacy, yes, but to certain degrees, and that would be Andrew. Okay? Translation study is a great place because people like that can have a discussion and argue about it. And one of the virtues of the discipline is that we haven't adopted one or the other. It's still an ongoing debate within the discipline. Any questions about that before we go on? Who's completely lost? Nobody. yet, or you're too afraid to tell. We can find famous statements about indeterminacy in the work of linguists. This is Roman Jakobson, a Russian linguist whose long career took him from Moscow to Copenhagen to Sweden, and he escaped from the Nazis and finished up as professor at Harvard University at the same time as Quine. Chomsky was working down the road at MIT at the same time. Chomsky attended lectures by Quine, so they're all close together. Anyway, at one stage, Jakobson, writing about translation, proposes that the meaning of a sign, the sign is the Saussurean union of the signify and signified. Jakobson says, well, the signified is not in the language as a fixed concept. The signified, the meaning, is itself a translation into some further sign, an alternative sign. And so this is an image of semiosis. I'll give you an example. I want to know, for example, what the Spanish term malestar means. Do we have Spanish speakers here? Where's my man? How do you translate malestar? Yeah, me too. Mal means bad, estar means being in the world. So I'm bad at being in the world. But nah, that's not a translation. Yeah. Okay, so I want to know malestar. I can go to a Spanish dictionary and look up what it says, and it gives me some words. But I want to know what they mean, so I look them up. And I wonder what they mean, so I look them up. And so on. And I get this process of semiosis where, in searching for certitude, I will exhaust the entire dictionary. I'll go through every word. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? It doesn't stop anywhere. This search for certain meaning never stops. And it'll take you 3 years to do that with a dictionary. In that time, the language itself has changed, so you have to begin again. Okay? So this very simple statement, a model of meaning making, as called semiosis, is a model of indeterminacy, but more profoundly, it's the search for certainty, the search for determinism, which is constantly productive. What does that mean? It means that translation itself doesn't represent meaning, it creates it. And it creates it in the original text. Okay? It's not as if when we translate, we look at the meaning and then reproduce it. No, we create a meaning. And that is the meaning of the text. Because that's the way meanings are created. Are you lost now? Okay, this is one of those theories that suggests that translation is really everywhere. And you can be very clever and say, but professional translation is the kind of equivalence, professional translation is the kind of semiosis that produces equivalence. Yeah? If we can get up, let's accept this is the way meaning is done in the world, but certain kinds of people can use semiosis to present a certain kind of meaning and get someone to believe it's equivalent to that. We produce this fiction that semiosis is stopped and this is valid. And stupid people are going to pay us to believe it. They're our clients. Okay? So you can be creative here and accept this model of meaning production. You can accept the creativity of translation. You can accept its ubiquity. It's everywhere. But you can still look at the work of professional translators and say they create the illusion of equivalence. That's what we do. That's actually what I believe. You don't have to believe it. It's an interesting one. Now, that's Jakobson. He was not a deconstructionist. He was one of those people who was able to look at the everyday use of language and extract models from that.
Okay, he was like Wittgenstein in that respect. The philosophical fascination of everyday language. Now, Jacques Derrida was doing something a little different. He was not anywhere near Harvard or MIT, he was in Paris, and he started his life translating Husserl from German into French. He was a translator at the beginning. Husserl was looking for certainty in knowledge. He's a phenomenologist. He wants to get to knowledge of the thing itself without the categories. Okay? And that attempt for certitude produced an awareness of incertitude. In Husserl, he was trying not to see indeterminism, but all he could find was indeterminism. So when Derrida translates Husserl into French, he writes it up as a discovery of indeterminism, as a critique of essentialism. Essentialism is the belief that there is only one true meaning for each linguistic sign, the essence. We find it in Plato. The essence of things is not in the form, it's in their spirit. Derrida then developed what became known as deconstruction. It was not his term at the beginning, as a practice. And he sees his practice as reading texts, usually classical philosophical texts, in order to draw out new meanings from them and to show that as much as they try to create a closed system of thought, no closed system is possible. Every attempt at meaning making can be broken and made productive. There is no essentialism, or in his terms, there is no transcendental signified. There is no one meaning that stands at the origin above all others. Only the play of meanings. So, to give you an example, Saussure developed the notion of the sign as the signifier and the signifier, right? That's what Jacobson is working from. Derrida goes to the text of Saussure and reads it. He says, yes, that makes sense. Yes, it's all very clear. Ah, but why is there only one signifier? Because it's people speaking, but we also write. There is another signifier. And there's a difference between spoken language and written language. And this difference is absent in Saussure's text. And I want to put that difference back into the language system and show that there is no stable meaning because there are two signifiers. Okay, that's just one example of the kind of reading that would be deconstructionist. It's the pulling apart of certainty, the revelation of indeterminism. For Derrida, translation therefore means necessarily transformation. Okay. Some people accept deconstruction as that, and therefore conclude that it doesn't matter what the translator does. You can just put down anything you like because there's no original meaning anyway. Okay? If you look at Derrida's work on translation and his comments on translations, it's precisely the opposite. He is a very, very close, exacting reader who follows the letter extremely closely and will do all kinds of research in order to try to demonstrate that the certainty is not there. Okay? So Derrida's translations are not free. They are usually very, very literal, very, very exact. Deconstruction does not equate freedom. In fact, the opposite. Okay. I go from the sublime to the ridiculous. Okay, indeterminacy at the source. Do you remember this one? Did we do this one? We didn't, didn't we? Oh, I'm mixing you up with my class in Melbourne. Damn it. Okay, I give them this exercise to translate. Okay, please look at this. This is the real exercise. It's one step. It's step 4. This is a telephone answering machine. Okay, and I want you to translate mentally the first sentence. Okay? Just translate it for me, the first sentence, in your head. And then I'm going to ask you to tell us the translation. Who would like to be a victim? Nobody. Yes, please. You look like a very competent translator. I trust you. You look very... Please, translate the first sentence for me.
Into Chinese.
Any language you like. Catalan would be great.
I can only translate that into English, Chinese.
Yes, into Chinese is good. Yes, I will accept you.
But can you understand?
Of course I can.
将电源插孔插入C 孔。
Ah, that was really nice. Because you didn't hesitate. But you didn't look confident at the end.
I was hesitating.
Yes, but and your voice went up at the end to indicate uncertainty. What are you uncertain about? You're not, well, that's meta uncertainty if you're not sure of what you're uncertain about. Okay. When I get my students to translate this, there's a problem about what a flap is, but a flap is just a thing you open. One of the problems is there's a diagram here, okay? Now, part of it is easy. You get the power source, which is a pin, and you put that in C. So I think that's relatively determined. That makes sense. I'm pretty happy. I put something in there. Okay? Now, I have to open some flaps. Where are the flaps? I know. Can't see them. Okay. This is the real instruction manual. Okay? The flaps are there. Okay. But we got a photo of the actual machine, and the flaps are up here on the top of the machine. Okay? And later, the cord goes through D, that's the grommet, so the cord goes off that way, okay? Now, the real problem is this thing here. Those two dots, that's a colon. What does a colon mean?
Explanation.
So, tell me this. Do you open the flaps and then put the pin in? Or do you put the pin in and open the flaps? Democratic translation, probabilistic. Okay? Who says you open the flaps and then put the pin in? Nobody. Who says you put the pin in, then open the flaps? One person. Who has no idea? Why not? What's wrong? You can't have no idea. Okay, it's a problem of two conflicting conventions. Alright? One of the conventions of an instruction manual is that the steps are given in the order in which they're done. So if you follow the order of presentation, you have to insert the pin, then open the front flap, then open the back flap. Right? That's the order of presentation. Who believes, who's going to translate like that? No. Yeah? Okay, so very good. We have somebody who's going to take a risk at last. Okay. There's another convention which says that the colon indicates how the previous thing is to be done. Okay? So on this reading, you should open the front flap, open the back flap, and then insert the pin. Who would translate like that? Democratically, that wins 6-1. And there's a lot of uncertainty around. Okay? Uncertainty at the source. Because it's a badly written text, and the image is no help at all. Really, okay? So, welcome to the real world of indeterminacy. This is an example from Alexander Künstli, who was a researcher in Geneva at the time. He gave this text to his students to translate, and he gave it to, I think, 6 professional translators to translate. So we saw how the students rendered the colon and how the professional translators rendered the colon. What do you think the difference might be? Most of the students turned the colon into a comma. Okay? They assumed that the order of presentation was the order of execution, and that the colon was a mistake, and they put a comma. They took a risk, and they were technically wrong. Most of the professionals kept it exactly as it is. They chose literalism. They didn't understand it. They said, that's okay, I don't know what it means, but I'll put exactly what's there because I can do this in English. And if it's problematic, well, the client wrote the text, so it's their problem. And after all, the user has the machine, so the user can figure it out. Okay? And so they chose to use risk transfer. They didn't take on the risk. They just put literalism and passed the problem downstream. You can do that. Some of the professionals, though, noted that here they would contact the client. Only the professionals realized that the client is part of the decision-making process and that they have the capacity to pick up the phone or send an email and get clarification or warn the client that there's a problem in the text, especially if, as is usually the case, the text is going into many different languages. Okay, so it's better to fix up the source problem at the source rather than just in the translation. Okay, what kind of indeterminacy? Is it an indeterminacy of similarity or indeterminacy at the source? At the source. Welcome to the real world of badly written texts, of texts that require active interpretation, and people can interpret in different ways, sometimes successfully, sometimes less successfully. Okay? So indeterminacy isn't just an abstract theory for fancy deconstructionists. It's also something we're dealing with every day in different ways. Did I give you this one? No. Translate, you did a good job on the last one. I would like I need a victim. Everybody's looking. You're looking at your phone, so you've got to translate. Oh, okay, I don't care. My son is on his phone all day. Can you see that sentence?
Yes.
Can you translate it into beautiful Chinese for me, please? Good. Can you back translate it for me, please? So, no. Can you translate that back into English? Again, please? No, you into Chinese. Yeah, go. She didn't hear you. Alright. Can you back translate what she said into English? Her translation into English.
Driving the planes can be dangerous.
Driving the planes can be dangerous. Good. Is that a good translation?
It's different from this one. Not good translation.
Not necessarily.
Why? What's wrong?
Fly can be. It can be the pilot or the passenger.
So how would you translate it into Chinese?
作品
2 minutes.
Okay, how do you translate it?
飞飞机很危险。
Uh,
坐飞机很危险。
And in English, that means?
If you're on a plane, you're in danger.
Yes, good. So, we have a sentence that is ambiguous. In the classic sense, it's an example from Chomsky, in fact. Okay? Where flying can be an adjective. Planes that are flying can be dangerous, or it can be a present participle. The act of flying planes can be dangerous. Okay? For one, you're a pilot, and for the other, you're a passenger. Okay? Do you understand the ambiguity? It's a simple syntactic problem. Now, what kind of ambiguity is at the source or in similarity.
Source.
Yes, but it's not quite like the other one. Because, as Chomsky pointed out, you can draw a syntactic tree to say which pieces go together and disambiguate the flying. Okay? And so you could translate one meaning or the other, and all you have to do first is decide which meaning you're translating. Okay? Now, Eugene Nida, that's him over there, uses a similar example. Eugene Nida developed his theory from transformational grammar. Okay? Actually from Chomsky's teacher. So he's one generation behind Chomsky. So he's got this one here, the fat major's wife, which could be the wife of the fat major,
Or a fat wife of the
or
major.
the fat wife of the major. We might have 2 or 3 wives. I don't know. So he says, first when you translate, this is Nida, he says, first you have to analyze the text. And when you analyze the text, you disambiguate it. So you decide what the meaning is, and then you translate that meaning. So he used basic transformational grammar to go from the surface level string down to the syntactic relations, and then get to a kernel, move the kernel across, and develop the new one. And that was a way of resolving indeterminacy. Okay? That's the ambiguity. Yeah, all the wives and maidens, right? Now, this is the origins of our contemporary concept of equivalence. And the equivalence for him at that stage was on the level of kernels, of disambiguated text. So Nida believed in indeterminacy, but he thought we could make the text determinate. Why did he think that? Because he was a priest, an evangelist. He was translating the Bible. And people who translate the Christian Bible believe they are guided by the Holy Spirit. And that with faith, they can reach the meaning that is to be translated. It's in the preface of all Christian translations. It says something like this: the translators were united in their faith and belief that the Bible is the Word of God. And faith has guided their decisions. There's this magic that comes through to lead us to the true text to be translated. Okay? And that is how we got dynamic equivalence, folks. Okay? It was a way of solving the problem of indeterminacy. If you believe. If you don't believe, it's a bit more difficult. Here's another example. Oh, no, I'm in trouble. I'm not in trouble. Public text. 1972. Did I talk about this with you? No. I started all my best material. Okay. Henry Kissinger goes to China and meets Zhou Enlai, and they have discussions. And then later, Richard Nixon comes to China. Comes to China and meets Mao Zedong, and they sign a joint communique called the Shanghai Communique, which establishes diplomatic relations and opens the possibility of trade. Now, I was drawn to this text because Donald Trump, prior to being president, as president-elect, made an announcement and he said, the status of Taiwan is open to negotiation. And everybody in China said, what? No, it isn't. Because we agreed on this in 1972. Okay? And Donald Trump said, everything is open to negotiation. You crazy idiot, Trump. But he was right. And I'll show to you that you're right. Can you read that text? Okay. Acknowledges that Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Straits, that's the water between here and the island, maintain there is only one China and that Taiwan is part of China. Good. That's correct. Is it ambiguous? No. Who says it's ambiguous? Who says it's not ambiguous? Everybody. Right? And that's how it was presented to the Chinese public. Okay? The United States agrees that Taiwan is part of China. Yeah. And so now we can proceed to begin with trade relations. Because that's what they wanted. They wanted to establish trade relations. Okay? Now, people in the People's Republic of China say Taiwan is part of China. Good. America acknowledges that. Fine. Not problematic. But people on Taiwan say that all of China belongs to them, and so Taiwan is part of China. Which is also true. They call themselves the Republic of China. And the agreement allows for both readings. It's the fat major's wife. Okay? Now, Kissinger called this constructive ambiguity. To produce a text that people can believe supports their position, even though it doesn't, and it enables an issue to be sidelined while we get on the more important business of trade, okay, and diplomatic relations. And it's remained sidelined since 1972. The status of Taiwan has not been decided. Okay, is this a translation problem? If you were to translate that sentence, how would you do it? There are translations. The translations into Chinese are word for word. You can reproduce the same ambiguity in Chinese, and people in China can accept it as what it is not. Okay? People don't see the ambiguity, and that's fine. That's its function. Indeterminacy function. It gets a little more complicated. The government of the United States acknowledges the Chinese position that there is one China and Taiwan is part of China. How do you translate acknowledges? How do you translate acknowledges? Who wants to be a diplomatic translator?
Is aware of.
A diplomatic. Acknowledge is aware of. Give me a Chinese text. Please, acknowledges. Chocolate? Which means? Admits. Good. One meaning is understand. And the other is? Sorry. Okay. The first translation says the United States is looking at this, saying, yeah, I understand what's happening. That's it. Takes what you said, admits, no, you said admits or is aware of, somebody said, yeah? So that's good, this is to be aware of. Okay? And this, Chang Ren, that you came up with, okay, means recognize, but I'm told it can also mean agree. Okay? Is this good or bad in my analysis? So, if you translate it like this, there's no agreement or otherwise. And if you translate it like this, whoa, they've agreed. Okay? This is performative. This is not performative, but I won't go into the linguistics of it. So, the way you translate creates meaning. Now, in the history of this text, the 1972, 1976 was translated like this, and then the Chinese translation shifted to this. Okay? So, this is the way the Chinese government traditionally does diplomacy by shifting position over time with infinite patience that people like Donald Trump will never understand. Okay. Part of the way that this understanding has evolved is through Chinese changing their translations, and therefore the understanding that the population has of the American position. I'll come to that in a minute. What's really interesting is that that same ambiguity was used to solve the problem of Palestine and Israel. After the 1967 occupation of Palestine by Israel, the United Nations passed an agreement requiring withdrawal from occupied territories. That Israel had to withdraw from occupied territories. Does that mean all the occupied territories? Or just a few? The French translation says des territoires occupés, which means all. So the Arabs all signed up to that translation, but the English translation is a partitive. It just says some of them. And so Israel and the United States signed up to that translation. And United Nations resolutions are valid in all translations. So we have translation producing an ambiguity, which is constructive, because people are able to do business. The status of Palestine remains unresolved, the status of Taiwan remains unresolved, and we get on with our business. What's interesting for me is that now we are in a trade war between the United States and China. That agreement was made in order to initiate understandings about trade. If we lose cooperation in trade, then the Chinese government has no interest in that kind of negotiation and will logically liberate Taiwan, I predict. I don't know, I'm not a specialist, I'm a linguist. But the function of the ambiguity was to sideline the problem. Put it over there, I can't read it too hard, over there. Stay there for 40, 50 years. No? Don't do anything while we get on with what's important. If we haven't got what's important, hey, we can go back and look at it. Yeah? The other interest, sorry about this sentence, but I'm just publishing an article on this with a doctoral student who did the research, we put it together. Okay, now I won't get into it. The reason why the ambiguity stood then was that Zhou Enlai would not allow the United States to have an active opinion, because that would mean interfering in the internal affairs of China. So it was very important that the United States not agree for or against, that it remain there because it was an internal issue. That's why the ambiguity kept everybody happy. Okay? Language is tricky. If you work for diplomats, you'll find out. Very tricky diplomats. What kind of person works with ambiguities like this? There is a psychological construct, it's been around since 1947, which is called tolerance of ambiguity. And the classic paper is from 1962, and it's a questionnaire which measures how well people tolerate. And it calls it ambiguity, but it's more than ambiguity, it's really indeterminacy. So you can see why I'm interested in this. And the questionnaire, is it like in China, you go to the doctors and you have to wait in the waiting room, and there's all these magazines, like women's magazines that I never see otherwise. So I open them up, and they've got these little questionnaires. What kind of person are you? How sexy are you? I don't do that one. So try these questions. Ambiguity has three features. One of them, in the psychological sense, is novelty. Say yes or no. I would like to live in a foreign country for a while. Who says yes? Who says no? Wait, you have to answer. Who in their life in the next 10 years would like to live in a foreign country for a while? Yeah. Who would not? Good. You've passed the test for novelty. Okay? I'll get another one here. Do you agree or not? What we are used to is always preferable to what is unfamiliar. Who agrees with this statement? If you agree, you think you just want to know what you already know. Who agrees? Hands up. Who disagrees? Disagree says you like unfamiliarity. Yeah? Right. Good. We're doing well. A person who leads a regular, even life with few surprises has a lot to be grateful for. Who agrees? You're in the wrong job. Who disagrees? Yeah, I want an exciting life with unpredictable things happening. And yeah, okay. So, on novelty, I score pretty well. Except for the last question. I like parties where I know most of the people rather than ones where all or most of the people are complete strangers. Okay? So decide for yourself. Do you like parties where there are strangers or parties where there are only friends? Who votes for only friends? Who votes for strangers? Some of you are really adventurous. I'm fine on everything else. I've lived in war zones. I'm fine. You know, unpredictable and danger and everything. Put me in a party with unknown people. No, that's the worst thing that can possibly happen to you. Okay, so what happens? People answer these questions, and there's a lot more questions like them, and we get a score. The second part of tolerance of ambiguity is, it's called insolubility, but that really means it dissolves in water. I think it means problems that can't be solved. All right? Do you agree? An expert who doesn't come with a definite answer probably doesn't know much. And if you're an expert, you must have a definite answer. Who agrees? Who disagrees? Yeah. Experts don't know, they're just experts in being vague. I'll tell you about that later. There is really no such thing as a problem that can't be solved. Who agrees? Who disagrees? Yeah. Translation is full of these. Most of our important decisions are based on insufficient information. Who agrees? Yeah, like getting married. You don't know what's going to happen, but you do it anyway, right? So, on insolubility, we scored very well. You're doing famously. The third is complexity. Somebody was asking the other day about complexity theory, but it has its status in psychology. This is boring behavioralist psychology, right? People who fit their lives to a schedule probably miss most of the joy of living. Who agrees? Okay. Who disagrees? That schedule is great. You'd like to have an ordered life. That's good. The last time I did this questionnaire was in Switzerland. Everybody voted for a schedule and orderly living. It's a culture. A good job is one where what is to be done and how it is to be done are always clear. Who agrees? You're really not in the right place. Who disagrees? I mean, there are jobs where you have to be creative. You have to invent your own solutions, right? And there are other jobs where you follow instructions. Translation is one of the first kind, usually. But, here we go. The sooner we all acquire similar values and ideals, the better. Who agrees? Who disagrees? It's delicate in China, that one. This one worries me. This really worries me because everybody agrees on that one more or less, right? That it's okay in a job to have unclear instructions and things. But when we ask my students about assignments that don't give clear instructions, they all complain. So teachers who hand out vague assignments give one a chance to show initiative and originality. Who agrees? Who disagrees? Yeah, the same as my students. Yeah, they want clear instructions. I'm saying, no, I want you to be creative and critical. What? How do I be critical? Give me rules. Okay, so there's some interesting questions, right? Now, think about the linguist with Gavagai. Novelty? Hey, he's traveled to a new country. Yes, he got that one. Insolubility? Yeah, there's no equivalence. He's not sure. So he scores well on that one. And complexity? He spends his whole life asking questions, finding or looking for certainty. So that linguist there has to be the kind of person who is tolerant of ambiguity in that psychological sense, which is really more than ambiguity. It means he's used to living with indeterminacy. That makes sense, right? Now, we find that high scores on the questionnaire I gave you some questions. It's a long questionnaire, but only one page. You can use it in experiments very easily. Oh, and it has been adapted later to cross-cultural communication. So there's a questionnaire on tolerance of ambiguity in cross-cultural communication, which you can use, easy to use. It has high positive correlations with openness as a personality trait, with extroverted people. You know, people can be very extrovert. Hi, I'm Harry, da da da. Or introvert, don't speak with you. Okay. So those two things. So extrovert people have high tolerance of ambiguity. And self-efficacy, that means you're able to measure what you're able to do. Okay, to measure your limits and to explore those limits as well. So there's a high correlation with those things, and a high negative correlation with anxiety. People who worry a lot don't score well, they don't like ambiguity, it makes sense. And perfectionism, obviously. If you're a perfectionist, you don't score very highly on this questionnaire. Who's a perfectionist here? It's okay. Yeah, at the back. That's the problem. I don't want to suggest you're in the wrong. Well, this man might be. Now, it also scores, and those things together predict who is going to be a successful language learner. We do the questionnaire, and we see who has learned languages, who learns fast, and the people who are very tolerant of ambiguity learn languages well. That's interesting, because we've all learned languages, right? So that's why we might be here and other people are not. Why we score high on this and other people don't. Yeah? It's also high in people who are polyglot, who know many languages. They score very highly, because they're always working with this indeterminacy between language systems. And in some studies, it correlates with a certain kind of creativity. In fact, there are statistical studies that show that multilingual people, polyglot people is the term I like, people who speak many languages, tend to be also very creative as musicians or at solving certain kinds of problems. So there is a certain correlation there. So it all makes sense, right? All translators should be good at this. We think. And if not, you can do terminology or technology, or you can correct text or be a reviser. There are plenty of jobs around for people who are not good at this. You know, you can apply style sheets and have a nice life. Here's some empirical research. It's 2017. It's a small sample. It's done by people in, I don't know where they are. I think they're in Leuven, but I'm not sure. Okay, they're in Belgium somewhere. Published in Australia. I'll have to go over here for this. They measured the tolerance of ambiguity in expert interpreters and novice interpreters. And they find a significant difference that the experts have higher tolerance of ambiguity than the novices. This can mean two things. That if you have that personality, you will advance in the profession. That's one reading. Or, the more interpreting you do, the more you develop tolerance of ambiguity. That's the second interpretation. You see, ambiguity is everywhere. Okay? That's one of the problems. We're not telling you, don't be an interpreter because you've got the wrong personality. No. Doing it can change your personality, which makes sense. Okay? Now that's great. That fits in with everything I've been saying. Look at the poor old translators though. Here are the novice translators, 41.3, and the expert translators, 40.29. The novices have higher tolerance of ambiguity than the experts. What? What went wrong? Okay? It's not significant. If the p-value is higher than 0.05, the result is not significant. So I'm not going to say this is generalizable. That is significant, and that's a good result to publish. And that's what they highlight in the paper. But I read through the details of the paper and I found this. That's wrong, something's wrong, red lights, we didn't find what we expected. And what they're finding contradicts a lot of the early research on Think Aloud protocols, where people were doing, getting translators to talk as they translate. That research found that professional translators did indeed discuss problems and talk about relations with clients and were able to formulate more alternatives and make unmotivated decisions or indeterminate decisions quite happily. So the early research found the opposite. For the researchers among you, one of the problems of the early research there, which is pioneering stuff and really good, is that with the Think Aloud protocol, it's very easy for you to go through and pick up the bits that support what you want to find. Okay? Since there are no numbers, we're talking about numbers and norms and stuff. The numbers can falsify your hypothesis quite easily. When you're doing purely qualitative research on interview data or self-report data, it's very easy for you to justify what you think you should find, which is what happens here, I think. So we have doubts about everything I've just said. Oh dear. This is a doctoral student I have at the moment. She is in Tehran, in Iran, and she's looking at personality traits with translators, okay? Now, one of the things, there are many things in this thesis, and one of the things we found is that open to experience personality, which correlates with tolerance of ambiguity, significantly correlates with years of experience in a negative way. Negative. So, the more years of experience, the less openness to experience. That's exactly it. That's the ambiguity. The longer they are in the profession, the less they are open to experience, which contradicts what we would expect. How could that be so? And significantly, the numbers say, something's wrong here. What's happening with professional translators? That they become slightly more closed to outside experience. This is exactly what we're trained not to believe. And we do find, however, that the more experience, the more they become risk takers. So the more they're prepared to take risks on the basis of textual data rather than extra-textual data. Now, these are small samples. There are 16 translators in that, and I think there are 12 in the previous one. So there's no fatality. It's just indications. We know this, and a bit of knowledge is better than no knowledge, but we can't say it's true of everyone. I'm just trying to make sense of what this data is telling us. And the best I can do is what I'm going to show you now. Early research, 2000, by Astrid Jensen in Copenhagen. Think aloud, 6 professionals, 6 novices. She found that expert translators, professionals, use something called the knowledge telling model. I won't explain that, I'll just go on. They engage in less problem solving, goal setting, and reanalyzing behavior than do the younger professionals. That is, they become more focused on the text and work faster and solve problems without asking themselves many questions about the client or about the purpose or anything. They learn that time is money and they just go straight through the text as fast as they can. Quite the opposite from what Skopos theory wants us to believe. Skopos theory suggests that the professionals are thinking about the client and their purpose and how to change the text and make it readable. What a lot of rubbish! Professionals are professionals because they make money. They make money because they go fast. And they go fast because they do this. I'm going back now. I'm going back. John Cadford, 1965, a long time ago, talked about equivalence and said, how do we know there are equivalents? And he said, it depends on the authority of a competent bilingual informant or translator. So this is the linguist and the native. And if the native is an authority, it's an equivalent. Got it? What translators do is authorize the translation. This is what we do when we post it. This is our new function, folks. We authorize it. We become the authority that produces the equivalence. And this is how we are living with uncertainty. Now, I hope I'm going back there. This is the origins of the psychological research on tolerance of ambiguity. It was a book called The Authoritarian Personality, written by a team of Jewish Germans, led by Theodor Adorno, who were trying to understand what had happened in Nazi Germany. And they were trying to analyze the authoritarian personality. And one of the chapters in that book formulates tolerance of ambiguity as something that authorities don't have. Inability to face emotional ambivalence. Values and religion are dogmatic. The opposite of tolerance of ambiguity is the authoritarian personality. And so tolerance of ambiguity was supposed to be non-authoritarian. But what we find happening in translators, I suggest, I don't know, but I'm trying to make sense of the data, is that the more professional they are, the longer they have in the profession, the more authoritative they become. And so their tolerance of ambiguity decreases. And we become those who produce equivalence. That's it. What do we do with uncertainty as translators? There are several things you can do. You can have faith and believe in revelation, like Eugene Nida did. That's one way of dealing with it. Okay? You can apply norms and regulations when they exist. When they don't exist, you get lost. You feel bad about it. You can learn through trial and error and see what works, and this is what professionals do, and I think this is how they gain their authority. Okay? You can be literal, like the translators of the Shanghai Communique. That is ambiguous, and you just translate it in an ambiguous way. Or the telephone answering machine, the correct answer is be literal. Don't take risks. Be literal. Okay? Or you can take calculated risks. And professional translators, we find, do tend to take calculated risks. How's the time going? I think I've said enough on this issue. And I've wandered between linguistics and psychology and empiricism and all over the place. Is that a good time to stop? I'll use another 3 minutes. Okay. I think from the things I've been picking up, you'll see why I'm interested in translators as managing risk rather than producing equivalents. I recognize that there is a thing called equivalence. I think it's an illusion, and I think translators produce it and they authorize it. And I think that's what we will do with machine translation. So it's not the machine translation is not a bad thing because we will fulfill that function of authorizing equivalence. It's okay. Now, the trick that what we see in professional translators is, and I think I mentioned, they have an uneven distribution of effort. Didn't I say that novices think everything's a problem? Professionals see big problems, right? So professionals, and we did the Kovac example, we can see that professionals see that there are high-risk bits of the text and low-risk bits of the text. Yeah? Now, what professionals do is they invest low effort when there's a low chance of communicative failure. So that's good. Okay? They are risk averse, they use risk transfer. Literalism. Phone the client. Don't waste time. Go fast. Okay? That's good for professionals. And when there's a high risk problem, a high risk of communicative failure, they invest higher effort. So we can have risk taking, a spectacular solution, or here you would phone the client or transfer your risks to some other instance. Okay? Note that risk transfer works in both places, which is why most professional translators, well, use high-risk solutions very sparingly. Now, with our novices, with our students who confront indeterminacy, what do they have to learn? They have to figure out that if it's not important, if it is important, they should spend effort. And the mistake is to have not low effort on important problems. Underwork or guesswork. If you're guessing, you're going to make a mistake. And professionals won't guess. They'll use strategies like risk aversion, like generalization, strategic omission, or being vague. All right, things like that. The other problem with novices, especially my Chinese students, is overwork. When they invest high effort in all the problems and are worried about all the minor ambiguities, which are part of a living language. It's an imperfect instrument that we use for communication, and people get anxiety attacks over all the problems that are in the text. They become inefficient by working too hard. So I find one of the tricks that happens through translation practice and through getting students to discuss, especially with each other or in a group, but they'll start to realize that the way to translate professionally is to use these strategies which are high effort for high risk problems, but especially to go fast when it doesn't count. And that is what Astrid Jensen found in her doctoral thesis. This is why the professionals use less problem-solving activities, less complicated cognitive processes than the students. They just got good, I think, at recognizing the unequal distribution of risk. Okay, now I've taken you on the complete tour from deconstruction through behaviorist psychology, or right through to risk management. So that's quite a tour for one day. If there are questions, I would be very pleased to entertain them.